All right, Alex, welcome to the Mastin Kipp Podcast. So happy to have you here, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dude, this is I think a really exciting conversation that we're going to have because, the third door and the whole idea of how people become successful, I've been obsessed over a version of that conversation for a long time. Mm-hmm. And as we were talking before, there's always that people talk about what we were saying before we started recording. One day there's going to be a podcast of just those conversations, right? But we're just talking about how, this book came to be. And, it's been such a pleasure to kind of support you in the process of manifesting the book. So can we just, before we get into some of the more detailed and cooler things, because there's so many amazing people and so many cool concepts from the book, I want to know one question, which is, for you, the interviewer, and now someone who's going out and sharing this message, what has been your biggest personal takeaway and transformation in your life as a result of being in proximity to all of these successful people? Like, what's the change in your life been?
The change in my life was unintended. So when I had started this journey, I was setting out to learn all these practical tools. I wanted to learn, Bill Gates' negotiating secrets. I wanted to learn Tim Ferriss's cold email template. Like, that's what I was really going for. What ended up happening, though, over this 7-year journey is I've learned that, you can give someone all the best tools and knowledge in the world and their life can still feel stuck.
Yeah.
But, you know this better than anyone.
It's so true.
But, you can send someone to Harvard. You can give them all the books in the world and their life can still feel stuck. But if you change what someone believes is possible, they'll never be the same. And what happened to me by accident over the 7-year journey of talking to all these people and doing all this research is it radically changed what I believe is possible.
How so?
I've never been the same. There's just story after story I can give. There's the more well-known people in the book, like Bill Gates and Lady Gaga, but there's also some people who have, stayed away from the public spotlight who are just as powerful, in my opinion. One guy, his name is Chi Lu. He grew up in a village outside of Shanghai, China, with no running water and no electricity. People were so poor that, they had deformities from malnutrition. And, we think our education system's bad, but in his village, for every 300 students, there was one teacher.
Wow.
So, clearly just no running water, no electricity. It's just wild. And by the age of 27, he's smart and went to school and worked as hard as he could. And by age 27, he was making the most money he's ever made, $7 a month.
Wow.
Fast forward 20 years later, and he's a president at Microsoft.
Wow. Yeah.
And it is one of the most unbelievable stories you've never heard. And there's stories like Chi, even stories of Quincy Jones, like these stories of people who have not only overcome like unbelievable obstacles, but the mindsets they used, it sort of cuts all your excuses out from, under you.
Totally.
Really say, I don't have enough time. I don't know if I can, work that much this week. When you hear of Chi Lu, and what's amazing is it's one thing to, watch an interview with someone on TV or read a magazine Q&A. But for me personally, sitting in that room, like looking in his eyes and him just being so human and him saying, look, I was just like you when I was your age. Really there's no other option other than to accept his truth.
That's right.
And that's actually one of the biggest reasons why we turned this book. The original book was going to be a Q&A. Each chapter a different person, one chapter on so-and-so, another chapter on so-and-so. But it's been a 7-year journey, and about 3 years into it, I got a publishing deal. And a year into the publishing deal, my editor calls me into his office in New York. And, he's like a very gruff New Yorker. And he's like, Alex, what's the purpose of your book? Is it to inform people or is it to change their lives? That's a very leading question. I hope it's to change their lives. And he goes, well, the book you're writing isn't going to do that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And this is literally exactly up your alley. He starts explaining to me Joseph Campbell and
Yeah.
the hero's journey. And he goes on to explain to me that every piece of art that changes someone's life is pretty much the same story. You can look at the Odyssey, you can look at Harry Potter, you can look at the Matrix, Star Wars, it's all the same story. And he explains to me when there's a protagonist that the reader can relate to, when that protagonist goes on a journey and that protagonist learns and grows, so does the reader. And I'm sitting there, I'm like 19, 20 years old. I'm like, well, who should be our protagonist? Should it be Bill Gates? Should it be Spielberg? And he's like, no, you idiot. It's you. And, you know, it seems silly in hindsight, but at the time, dude, I was so attached to the original vision of the book, of it being Q&A and me not being part of it. It took like 5 or 6 months for me to fully come to terms with what he was saying. But now when I look back on it in retrospect, it's the most obvious decision, because now the way the book is written, it's written as this narrative, almost like cinematically, where, you know, the reader is sitting down with Bill Gates in his office drinking Diet Cokes, or, you know, the reader is with Lady Gaga in the nightclub with her arm around her or him. And that's where the possibility comes into play. Because if I didn't do that, it would have just been a book of tools and tactics and knowledge. But now it's a book of experience and growth and possibility.
Well, what I love about it is, you know, because, you know, as a coach, you know, the excuses, defense mechanisms that I run into on a daily basis are rampant, and I'm always very impressed with the human being's nervous system's creativity of why they can't do something.
Right.
And obviously it's always because they're trying to defend and be safe, and usually on an unconscious level. But when you start looking at the stories of successful people, you know, obviously modeling is a really big deal, but also environment is a big deal too, because, you know, when you're in a certain type of environment, and it doesn't necessarily have to be where everything's given to you, because, you know, there are, you know, lots of people who have lots of stuff that's given to them, and they don't make anything out of it. Is there a common motivator, environment, cue, you know, threat, something that you've been able to identify, or a set of common in circumstances that aided in the sort of the success and the achievement of certain people becoming this way? Or is it just random, like as far as like what you've, like the stories that you've heard and the structure of, like, talk about Campbell, right? Like they all had a call to adventure. They all probably refused the call. They all at some point had to say, fine, I'll go do it. And then there was the tests and the ordeals and stuff like that. Was there commonalities in the environment that was, you know, getting people off their butt? And was it more than just like self-motivation? Because I think a lot of people think I just have to motivate myself more, but I think it's more than that. I'm just kind of wondering what you discovered in the nuance of the stories that you heard.
When I had started, I pretty much had this assumption that it has to be random. It has to be different. And I had no intention of finding, you know, that one key. You know, we've all seen those TED Talks of, you know, the one key to success. And I normally just roll my eyes. But what ended up happening is, and this is about maybe like 70% into this journey, is I realized every single person, it doesn't matter if it was, you know, Spielberg in film or Maya Angelou in poetry. It didn't matter what their field was or where they grew up or how they grew up. They all ended up treating life and business and success the exact same way.
Huh.
And the analogy that came to me, you know, you have a background in music. It was sort of like this common melody in every interview. And I'm sure with your coaching, you start hearing these common melodies in all your clients, you know? And the reason I use the word melody is it's not the lyrics. They're not saying the same things.
Right.
But, you know, there's a similar energy to how they're saying it.
And how would you describe it?
So the analogy that came to me, because I was 21 at the time, is that every single one of these people treats life and business and success like a nightclub. So there's always 3 ways in. There's the first door, the main entrance, where the line curves around the block.
Right.
Where 99% of people wait around hoping to get in. And then there's the second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires and celebrities go through. And school and society have this way of making you feel like those are the only 2 ways in.
Yep.
You either wait your turn or you're born into it.
Yep.
But what I've learned is that there's always the third door. And it's the entrance where you jump out of line, run down the alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, go through the kitchen. There's always a way in. And it doesn't matter if that's how Gates sold his first piece of software or how Lady Gaga got her first record deal. They all took the third door.
Totally. I love that. Well, it's funny you say that because I remember, talking about music, I was in the music business. And when I was like, I don't know, 15, 14, around that age, I was really into hard rock. And there was a concert that came to my town near Lawrence, Kansas. And I got there super early, like doors like opened at 10 a.m. It didn't really start till 1. I got there at like 9:30 and
Wow.
I got inside and very quickly I learned that the laminate, the all access pass for like getting all the way backstage is the exact same design as the t-shirt that they were selling at the event. So I bought a t-shirt, I went home, I scanned the t-shirt in, okay, and I printed it out. I took a picture of the laminate. I printed out. I minimized it in Photoshop. Printed it out both sides. I had a laminator, and I laminated it, and I made it look almost exactly the same as the one. And I ended up walking into Steven Tyler's dressing room, right? So like, I know exactly what you mean. And that's one, I mean, that mindset after that moment, actually, I wouldn't have the vocabulary at that time. I just thought there was always a crack in the system. And I love this concept of a third door because also growing up, my parents always told me there's always 3 options to every situation. And so that's why I was so drawn to this topic of the third door. And obviously, I've talked about this before, but let's talk a little bit about what that means, because I feel like a lot of people live in that either or mindset that you're describing. And there's sort of this yes and concept. And I've also found that a lot of times in my own life and with a lot of our clients and, some of our mutual friends that, have their own third door experiences, that those third door experiences are usually counterintuitive. They require risk, and people think you're basically fucking crazy for doing whatever that is, and or needy and or insane. And I'm just kind of wondering, was there a common mindset? Was that true for the people that you saw as a whole? And was there a common mindset about what to do in the face of people thinking you're nuts or not believing in you or doubting you and stuff like that? Because I think one of the biggest issues that people have, especially the concept of Campbellian terms, is breaking free from the tribe, breaking free from the approval of others, and like saying, no, fuck you, I'm going to follow my own thing. So I'm just wondering if you saw any of that and if you could help clue us in on some.
This is why I love you, because that's literally been – I probably could have saved a lot more time on my journey if I came to you first. Because I spent a lot of years trying to understand this aspect of it, because what was the most surprise – once I had the third door analogy, I started going into these interviews, and I still had, a handful of interviews left. So I would – whether it was Jessica Alba or Pitbull or Jane Goodall, I would, because I had the analogy, but I didn't know it would be the title of the book yet. So I was sort of testing it out, and I would sit down with them in the interviews, and I would tell them the analogy without any context and just see what would happen. And they would like eyes light up. Like Pitbull's like, dude, that's the story of my life,
Wow.
And Quincy Jones was like, dude, that's in the pocket. That's the key. And what I started realizing once I started getting that affirmation, I would start then sharing it with my friends. And what I've realized is that the hardest part of the third door is not what I expected. I had assumed the hardest part of someone achieving a dream would be, running down the alley, finding the right door. Okay, it's locked. Let's find the window. Okay, that's locked. Let's go through the kitchen. I assumed that's the hardest part. That's logically makes sense. What I realized, which you touched upon, is that once you are already running down the alley, just need and survival, if you have, half a brain, you'll figure out how to get in.
Yeah.
The reason people don't achieve their dream has less to do with how hard it is to take the third door and more to do how hard it is to leave the line for the first door.
Totally.
Because waiting in line at the first door, first of all, it's where you were born. It's where you went to school. It's where your friends are. It's probably where your parents are. It's, you're on the sidewalk. It's well lit. There's nice, clean concrete. It's pretty safe out there, actually. Although you're not, getting your dream, it's safe. It's well lit. There's a lot of people there. There's maybe like a police car outside making sure everyone's okay. The second you leave that line for the first door, you're not with your friends anymore. You're muddy, you're bruised. There's a shady guy in the alley trying to take your money. Like, you cut your hand in the glass of the window, and you have no idea if you'll ever find this third door or if you'll just be wandering in this alley forever.
Totally.
There's no timeline. In the first door, at least the bouncer's like, well, you're number 362, and that'll be another 5 years before you get your promotion.
Right. Yep.
Like, there's some certainty.
Yeah, totally. And then exponential technology comes along and everybody gets laid off.
Right. You know what? You know what's funny? A lot of people would still rather that.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. No, I agree. You know, it's interesting too, because, you know, in the concept of building a business, you know, I've seen this trend where, you know, whether, especially in the consulting or coaching business, but also software, any real business, there's a unconscious belief or expectation, I should say, where people think that the customers or clients they're going to get are going to somehow mirror their family of origin experiences, and they actually don't try to put themselves out there because they think it's only going to be rejection. It's only going to be, you know, playing it safe. And so it's very fascinating to see that, you know, it can be scary to actually try to take that third door, because the technical term is the neuro expectancy. The expectation of your nervous system is that it's just going to be basically the same. So in that context, I know in my own life, and I've seen this trend before, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Usually right before that third door opens, there's a dark night of the soul, right? There's like a and you're like, oh, I definitely got to give up now. And the people in your life are like, what are you doing? Like, I told you it was bad. Now look where you are. I was right. So was that a common trend? And have you also heard stories of people who maybe aborted that process and didn't complete that process? I'm kind of curious, because those are the decision moments are so important.
The people who aborted the process aren't in my book.
No, I just mean like in your own life. Like if you've seen, because you can juxtapose, you have the data to be able to juxtapose, right? Obviously, we're talking about people who went to their door and crushed it, right? But
do you know what's interesting? Is that, like, I'll give an example from my own journey. So I went on this 8-month quest trying to interview Warren Buffett. You know, he's the greatest, you know, most successful investor in financial history. And I was just like, if there's anyone who could give me the lessons I'm looking for, it had to be Buffett. So I go on this 8-month quest where at this point in the journey, I had dropped out of school and I was working full time. And you have to understand, I'm waking up at 6 a.m., going to sleep at 11 p.m., and my only job is trying to contact Warren Buffett. So, you know, after the first month of rejections, it starts getting dark. By month, 6 of rejections, it is getting really bad. And, you know, I'm writing handwritten letters to him, and he's actually handwriting responses back.
Oh my God.
But, you know, I'm writing a 2-page letter, and he's writing a 2-sentence response saying, thank you, but no thank you. But still, I'm just like, I'm going to keep at it. I'm calling his assistant week after week after week. And they get to the point that I'm flying out to Omaha, hoping I can bump into him at a grocery store. Like, it is getting very ugly. And, you know, there were points where I was rejected so many times. And especially at this point, early on in my journey, my identity was so wrapped into this book that a rejection, I had no clarity, no perspective. It was, you know, Paulo Coelho has this great line where he says, you know, in school, if you get an F, you know, it might hurt, but it's not the end of the world. But when you're pursuing your life's calling, each rejection feels like a rejection of you.
Yep.
And I was in that place times 100. Like and it got to the point where it felt like my insides were black and blue and I was coughing up blood.
Wow.
And
I can relate.
And I remember, you know, I'm 20 years old. My family thinks that, you know, they came to this country for me to get an education, become a doctor. So not only have I turned my back on their entire dreams and hopes, I'm now in the Motel 6 in Omaha, curled up on the ground crying because some random guy they've never heard of won't talk to me.
Totally.
Like they think I've lost it. And there were points where I was so rejected and in such a deep hole. It felt like, remember the movie Castaway?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, totally.
So it felt like I was, Tom Hanks on a desert island, no phone, like just completely desolate. And what I've learned in these darkest of dark moments, when you are ready to quit, and because to be honest, there's all these authors who are like, I've never thought of quitting on my dream. Dude, I've thought about quitting 100 times.
Oh my God.
I've
I think about it daily still sometimes,
Right. So I've come
yeah.
super close.
In fact, I actually give myself permission to quit for an hour at a time. I'm like, I quit for the next hour. I'm done. Like I walk away,
Exactly. And in those darkest moments when I'm ready to quit, I've learned two things have helped me the most. The first thing is, if you go back to the Castaway analogy, what's your Wilson? What's that volleyball that you talk to keep you sane? And to me, I ended up always going back to the only thing I had left when my family wasn't able to help me and my friends were gone and no one could help. It was going back to the original reason why I had started in the first place.
I love that.
And I had this idea in the beginning that if all these people came together, not for press, not to promote anything, but really just to share their best wisdom with the next generation, people can do so much more. And that belief really, at the end of the day, look, when I would go back to it, it wasn't like I would go back to that thought and I would be 100% energized and I'd be back in. But it would prevent me from completely letting go.
Totally.
And I think that's all you actually need. You just need that one thread that lets you in the darkest of times hold on.
Totally. I love that. And would you say that your experience, which by the way, thank you for sharing that, because I think, one of the things I love most about talking with you and most every conversation we had until now has never been recorded for a podcast. But there's just a realness, and I appreciate that because I don't do small talk. I like big talk, and you're just so real about that. And in your experience, would you say that was also a through line in the common trends that you've seen? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, Alex, good for him. He's got a book published and talked to all these people, or Mastin has this career or whatever. And they discount the fact that, like, hello, you're literally talking to someone who's giving you the exact advice that you need to hear to get to the next level. And you're negating it because they've achieved the thing that you want to achieve, but you think it's not possible for you to achieve it. So you're going to negate the advice because they have what you don't have yet. It seems insane. Right. But have you seen that? Like, easy for Warren Buffett to say, or easy for so-and-so to say. But have you seen that trend? And what would you say to people who are maybe naysayers and think it's easier for Warren Buffett? People always get mad that they're like, Beyonce and I don't have the same time in a day. She has all these assistants. I'm like, well, she didn't used to have all of them, Right.
And, that was definitely a problem in the beginning, especially when I was writing the book. I was aware that that's a natural human tendency to negate stories like that. And that's why I spend so much time including these stories. Because when it's very easy to say, oh, easy for Quincy Jones to say. He was friends with Ray Charles when he was 16. I don't know anyone like that. That motherfucker was eating rats for dinner. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Quincy Jones was growing up. He ate rats for dinner. He grew up as a kid seeing dead bodies every day. Like, I know some people have serious trauma. I can't even imagine what it feels like to literally grow up surrounded by so many mobsters and gangsters.
Absolutely.
Corpses on the street every day. And, when he was a kid, he was just, I think, 8 years old, and he took a wrong turn down the wrong street. And a gang just got his hand, put a switchblade through his hand, nailed him to a fence, and then took a frozen ice pick because it was the winter and stuck it into the back of his neck. And he thought he was going to die. And still to this day, he has those scars. And I think there's tremendous value. If you read Forbes magazine, they love to talk about, this guy's net worth is this, and, she has this private jet, and, what is it like running a, multi-billion dollar company? I can't relate to those stories unless I know that they used to be just like me.
Exactly.
Like with Warren Buffett, I didn't know, everyone talks about him being the, wealthiest investor in history. I had no idea that nobody used to take his meetings when he was starting out. No one wanted to invest in his fund. Hearing stories of him getting rejected and the fact that people in Omaha wouldn't even let him into their office. And finding out how he overcame that, all of a sudden turned him from Warren Buffett, the richest investor in history, to it turned him into like Grandpa Warren for me.
Totally. 100%. I think that's so true. I think that, I can tell you for sure, I've met a lot of successful people and work with them and coach them and stuff. And no matter what you think the billboard is, there's always something happening behind the scenes. And there's a tremendous amount of resilience it takes to, get to a certain level and certainly maintain it for more than a hot second, right? There's so much resilience. I'm kind of curious about, in your experience now of being in proximity to all these folks, and how much does resilience, hanging with something, even when you get there, play into it? Because I think, I started thinking a lot about this. I used to be a music manager. The last couple of years, I've had 2 clients commit suicide, former clients. One was Chris Cornell from Audioslave and Soundgarden. And then Chester Bennington played at his funeral, who they were good friends and one of our clients. And then a few months later, he committed suicide, and he saw the impact that it had on Chris's family and stuff like that. And so there's this idea, and it got me thinking, like, just because you could be Linkin Park and sell out millions of, records and all the stadiums everywhere, the stigma that you're successful and you're happy is complete horseshit. So I'm just kind of wondering if you heard stories of people who, once they got there, there's a level of resilience and still the trials are happening. Because it's not like you get there and then it's like, and all is well, right? Like there's still a lot of work to be done. I'm kind of wondering if you've seen any of any trends or any sort of common patterns there too.
Yeah, going back to Quincy Jones, he's done a lot of work on himself, and especially at a point where he was already really accomplished. And I think it goes back to what you said, which is just because you've achieved a certain amount of, career success, it doesn't mean your traumas are gonna, be like, well, you hit that number you were looking for, Mastin. I'm gonna just pack up my bags now. Now that
exactly. Yeah.
I was only sticking around until you were on your hustle. Now that you've made it, I'm gonna
exactly.
If anything, they might be like, oh, you think you're good, motherfucker?
Exactly.
Watch me now.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that you're busy and you have a full schedule, now let me see the havoc I can,
exactly
play in your life. And Quincy has this great, he has so many great lines. One of my favorite things he said, he said, there's a statute of limitations that's expired on your childhood trauma. Fix your shit and get on with your life.
I love that.
He said, he's like the biggest thing he teaches the musicians he mentors. He's mentored Michael Jackson. He mentored Oprah Winfrey, Will Smith. He said, the biggest thing I teach the people I mentor is to know yourself and to love yourself. Know yourself and love yourself. And, that's very tied into the whole, statute of limitation on your childhood trauma. To know yourself fully, you have to know what made you you. And many times, like you talk about, it's our pain from our childhoods that have been the most formidable to who we are. And you can't know yourself today until you know who you were.
That's right. But you can't linger in it either.
The whole point is to go there, understand it, and only then when you understand it can you love it. And when love it, does it let its script go?
For some reason, I just heard you say that in like Yoda's voice in my head because it was very Yoda-esque what you just said.
Is it because my grammar was off?
No, nothing at all. No, it's actually Yoda saying it correctly grammatically. But I think it's so true. Now let me switch gears just a little bit because I've always been in awe of you. I can't even remember when I first met you. Maybe it was Maya.
Was it
Maya? 19. But no, I remember who introduced us. I think it was Maya Watson.
We met. Yeah, it was through. We met, I think, for like 30 seconds at Summit once.
Yep. Through Maya, though, I think.
Well,
Maya was there.
Maya and Penny Thao.
Yep. But
Both.
was it Maya? I think it was.
Both made the connection. Yeah.
I think it was. I remember it as a Maya connection, but it might be Penny too. I can't remember exactly. But what I do remember so clearly is, when I came into the music business, I came in LA at 19, and by 21 I was senior vice president of a record label, right? So like I worked up pretty fast, but then I crashed really hard. And it was really hard and has continued to be hard for me to recover from that because I built so many relationships during that time, obviously hustling and doing what we do to, climb up the ladder and stuff like that. And it's been hard for me to build and maintain relationships similarly since, because when I crashed, no one came and was like, "Hey kid, let me help you out." Right. So I have like this, I've been learning over the years to trust and trust more and more, but I've been so impressed with your ability to build relationships, and not only build relationships, but build quality relationships. And from as far as I can tell, and I'm pretty discerning eye at this stuff, maintain them, right? And you've been able to obviously get yourself in lots of different rooms that people wish they could be in, and your network of people, like, when I saw like this book come out, there were people I didn't even know that you knew that were like, I'm like, that person, so I'm just like, I'm wondering for you, like, if you have any advice, or like, how do you build relationship and how do you maintain relationship? How do you view relationships? Because I think a lot of people, I never go out for transaction. I never like, oh yeah, you give me that, I'll give you this. And I'm really bad at transacting on my relationships. It's one of the reasons why I probably have them, the ones that I do have. But do you have a way of thinking about how you build relationships, how you add value, how you maintain and culture and nurture relationships? Because some people would just like, oh, you did that for me, thanks, cool, peace out, forget about it, or whatever. And I've just been so impressed with how you've been able to build, nurture, and create real authentic relationships and sustain those. I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts or tips on that, because I think so many people go into things either going for the take, or they don't build things, or they have relational trauma. And I think, obviously dreams are fulfilled through relationship, obviously. Yeah. So you can't do it alone. So I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts on that and tips on how you do that, because I'm so fascinated by it.
Thanks, man. And I think you touched on it when you were talking about it, because for me, this is how I view there's a difference between a relationship, like someone who I count as a friend like you, versus, maybe a business contact, right? A business contact is a transactional, you're doing business with someone. The difference between that and a relationship, to me, is that a relationship is, and again, I also think a lot of people are like, oh, if someone's a relationship, if someone's a true friendship, an authentic friendship, you shouldn't ask for anything. I don't subscribe to that. I think there's an important caveat though, where if you do ask for something and for whatever reason they can't do it, and they're like, yo man, I wish I could, I have a tight budget, I can't buy your book, or I have a tight, I'm having some family stuff, I can't have you on my podcast. You go, dude, I'm so sorry you're going through that. Like, I completely understand. How can I help? And not like you strategically say that, but if that's actually your genuine gut,
of course,
that's a friendship,
That's right.
I think if you're not asking your friends for help, then that's also not a friendship. If you're afraid to ask them for something, you don't actually have a real relationship with them.
That's true. I will say, and I'll out myself, I'm an only child, and asking for help as a default is like, no, I got it. Especially because growing up, my mom was mostly bedridden with back pain and out and on all kinds of opiates and stuff. And the whole focus of the household was take care of mom, which is not negative or bad. It just was what it was. And so I always felt like I had to take care of myself. And that wasn't like a conscious choice. It was just something I decided. But I've learned that obviously I can't do it by myself. It takes teamwork, make the dream work. I have a team. But I have noticed consistently that, especially with the givers, right? It's so hard for them to ask for help and to admit that they need it. So is that kind of something, because it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying is that you view it more as asking for help than some type of transaction, essentially. Like, hey, I have this thing. And does that make sense?
Right. 100%. And one of the things I've learned is that, what you said is exactly right. It's not a transaction in the sense of, yo, I hooked you up, now it's time to hook me up.
Totally. Can't do it.
It's, yo, I love you and I know you love me. I'm in this time of need. Could you help me out? And if not, dude, I still love you 100%. Our friendship is way bigger than this ask.
Totally. I love that. I think that actually I'm having an aha moment right there because, I've been so hyper vigilant and on guard to not have transaction. But I think even me, I'm literally having an aha moment as we speak at this moment. Viewing that through the lens of asking for help, I think it's kind of scary actually
Right.
to think about that,
If you think our friendship is way bigger than this ask.
Totally.
Now,
That's amazing.
Truthfully, now this is the real. Like in this book launch, hundreds of friends came and rallied. So, 99% of my friends blew me away.
Totally.
Yeah, there were a couple people who literally didn't respond to my text. And I was like, that's weird. And then I'll send another text and still no response. And I'm telling only a couple people. And that just been like, all right, maybe there's something about, maybe they get hit up. So I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
This is the thing. You don't know what's going on in someone's life. For me, last year, my dad passed away. In just the past couple of months, my grandpa passed away. My grandma passed away. And dude, it's taken me a couple days to get back to a homie on text or something. Not because I don't love them, but just because I'm sitting with my mom crying.
Totally.
And going through my own pain has given me empathy for other people. And I just now have an assumption of I have no idea what they're dealing with.
Totally. 100% true. It's so true. I think that's awesome. I think it's so true. And I can tell you it's true for me, for sure. Because I am sometimes, especially because I go in these moments of teaching for 2 or 3 weeks. And that actually happened with this interview, right? I was at Claim Your Power Live and I had actually 15 days of back-to-back 12 hours a day teaching. And I just that's such an energetic output. But the first person I got back to when I came back to the land, I call it the land of the living. It's like, dude, we got to get Alex. But I think I completely get that. And I think what's interesting, and one of the questions I have too is that, this idea, which I won't get into all the science, but the latest trauma research in science is showing us that mental wellness, mental health, the mental health world message is self-regulate your emotional state. You have to take care of it yourself. And if you can't self-regulate, then we're going to medicate you. However, the research shows that the markers for mental health are built into relationship, and that you can't actually self-regulate without co-regulating with another person or another group of people, right?
Ooh, that's good.
But yeah, it's so cool. And it completely shatters the I gotta love myself in isolation trend, essentially, because social media has isolated everybody into thinking that they have friends, but they're using their thumb to hit or something. But I'm curious about because the other thing is that you have built such an incredible network and you have acted on it. I love the idea of viewing it through the lens of asking for help, but how do you get out of isolation and build a network? Because I know I have a sort of a way that I haven't reverse engineered my process, but I have a really great network. But whenever I meet someone who's really good at creating, not just relationships that you transact on where it's just tit for tat and card for card, but people talk about you, man. They their eyes light up, their facial expression change, they get joyful.
That's the best compliment.
It's true, man. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, wow, it's consistent. It's not just one person likes you. You are universally loved. I'm kind of curious, how do you?
I'm going to listen to this podcast every morning.
It's true. I've never met one person like Alex. I don't know about Alex. Everyone that I've met that knows you has been just so stoked on you. And I'm just kind of wondering, also, how do you view introducing, building relationships and adding value? Because I also feel adding value is such an important thing to do. And I always lead with the give. I very rarely lead with an ask in anything. And I always am asking questions. How can I serve? 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 To the point where the people closest to me sometimes Mastin, knock it off. But I'm just kind of curious, as far as building a network and getting out of isolation and really, because you can't do it alone.
This is good. Right? Yeah.
What's your mindset on that?
So I've never dissected it consciously, but even just now while you were talking, I sort of see it as, this, if I had to dissect it, which it feels sort of weird, but I think it might be helpful, is it's almost like this 3-act play. The first act, so let's say Because, dude, 7 years ago, the only person who I knew was like the barber down the street. It wasn't like I was born into this family with like connections and I sort of rode that wave. So, my grandma, even when we were kids, had this saying like, what for you need friends when you have cousins? Like that was our mantra growing up. Like, what
Totally.
for friends?
That's funny. That's Yoda grammar right there.
Yeah, well, she talks like Yoda grammatically. So we can. I don't know if you want to talk about all three aspects, but
I'm curious. I'm curious
There's the
you
zero.
did a great
one.
job building relationships for this
Thank
book,
you,
man. I mean, seriously, it's impressive.
This whole book is a testament to complete strangers' act of kindness.
Totally. But hold on. I gotta pause you on that for 1 second. Call it a little bit of BS because it is their act of kindness, but there's something about you that causes that in them.
Yeah.
Like
Okay,
when I'm around, like, dude, like when we talked about like your book and stuff like that, I was like, let me help, right? Because I have that innate feeling around you. There's lots of people who ask me for help, and I'm like, oh, I love, peace be with you, No way.
There's a great quote from the founder of TED, Richard Saul Warman, in the book, and he says, I live my life by two mantras. Number one, if you don't ask, you don't get. And number two, most things don't work out.
Yep.
And if you approach your relationships with that mindset, if you don't ask, you don't get, but also most things don't work out, it sort of sets your expectations pretty accurately. And so
I like that.
We'll go back to those three phases, right? The first phase is the 0 to 1 phase. Let's say no one, you're entering a new industry. How do you meet people? Stage 2 is how do you, cultivate those relationships and grow them and intertwine them, because the more interconnected your friend groups are and your network are, the stronger it is. And then the third is sort of the phase where you and I are, which is, we've been friends for years and it's just natural and I can see friends with you for the next 50 years.
What, not 60? What the fuck, man?
Well, with a singularity, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's funny. At age 75, I'm friendships.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can, I don't know how you want to guide this.
I'm just curious about your mindset because, it takes like I see, cause I'm an entrepreneur and I coach people and I get the real story of what's going on behind the scenes. And I see things that are going on that people tell me shit that they don't tell their family, loved ones, all that stuff. Right. But I'm also a peer in this network of people that range from entertainment to personal development, all the arts and, some politics. I mean, so many different things. Right. And I'm a obsessive about studying patterns. I'm very observant and I love watching patterns. And I see some people that kind of come up and then they kind of crash. Some people kind of come up and then they kind of just like linger a little bit. Some people come up and then they go and they stay up and they keep going. And not just successful, but there's like a certain genuine zest about someone. And I've been just so impressed with your ability to build relationships because, it'd be easy for you to go, hey man, so, hey, hook me up with this book, send it out. I know Warren did that, whatever. And then like, just make it like that. But first of all, I never even you don't lead with that in our relationship at all. I have to remind myself like, oh yeah, he did all this cool shit. Cause I'm just so focused on how cool you are. And I'm just kind of curious about like your mindset around the building of relationship, because I think a lot of people, they like I've seen people that sometimes get around me and they get sometimes really nervous and they just start talking really fast. And sometimes people just themselves, and you get like, I'm getting better just because I always see the best in people, but I'm getting more discerning about like, I'm feeling it coming. I feel you wanting something from me from across the room now. And then there are other people who just, they make my defenses go down. And I'm just kind of curious, if you've had any thoughts around, specifically just relationship building, because I think that's the name of the game, right? I mean, everyone has to have relationships and a network and friends and support.
Well, what I want to focus on is the 0 to 1 part, because I think that actually applies to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're just starting out in your career or if you're, 50 years into your current career and you just want to take it to the next level. Everyone needs that 0 to 1.
Yes.
So what I know is one of the people who I interviewed that gave me the best advice on this topic was Tim Ferriss, the author of the 4-Hour Workweek.
Of course.
And Tim Ferriss started his career. And now the context is pretty funny. The way I got the interview with Tim Ferriss, because I was 18 years old, is I hid in a bathroom for 30 minutes as he was walking past. And I jumped out the second I had my ear pressed against the stall waiting for him to
Oh my
come. So it's a pretty funny story.
Dude, that's hilarious.
But I finally get this interview with Tim Ferriss, and I find out he got his first job by emailing the CEO of a company that he wanted to work with 32 times.
Wow.
Now, talk about an intentional relationship that he cultivated. And then years later, when he wanted to become an author, Tim didn't know anyone in the publishing world. So he cold emailed best-selling authors asking for advice and cultivated those relationships and ended up publishing the 4-Hour Workweek. So in many ways, cold emailing has been the key of Tim's early success, how he broke through. So when I was interviewing him, I sort of pressed him on this cold email. And he gave me a template, his secret cold email template, which I've used over the years to meet mentors. It's indirectly the reason I got to meet you.
Huh.
It got me interviews for the book. It still, even with the book launch, has changed the entire book launch. And my favorite thing about this cold email template is because it's in the book, now that the book's out, if you go to like Amazon and see the reviews, like there's some people who are like, the cold email template worked! As if like it was the last thing they expected. Which, truthfully, even for me, I was like, all right, sure, this works for Tim. It's not going to work for me. But dude, it's worked for it's shocking. And
That's
this
amazing.
is how it works. Ready?
Yes.
So it goes like this. And this is the thing. People think, okay, I'm going to tweak this and make it my own. No. Follow this exactly, like baking, like a prescription medicine. Do not tweak it. So it goes like this. Let's say I'm sending an email to you. Hi, Mastin. Next paragraph. I know you're incredibly busy and you get a lot of emails, so this will only take 60 seconds to read. Boom, next paragraph. This is where I put 1 to 2 sentences in max of who I am and what context you have that's relevant to the person. And if, let's say, it's me now, I might say I'm an author and something that's relevant to you. Or if, let's say, this is me 10 years ago, it's, I've read Daily Love and Claim Your Power 5 times. Whatever is relevant to that person. But again, 1 to 2 sentences max. This is not your life story section.
Right. Yep.
Boom. Next paragraph. Again, 1 to 2 sentences max of your highly specific question for that person. Mastin, what's one book you recommend for someone with immense childhood trauma? Mastin, what's one podcast episode I should listen to help me with building relationships? Something that someone can answer immediately in a sentence. And then the final paragraph is the clincher. You go, I totally understand if you're too busy to respond.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Even a 1 or 2 line reply will completely make my day. All the best, Alex. And we've gotten responses from Malcolm Gladwell, Sheryl Sandberg, all to this cold email template.
Huh. That's
because
amazing.
It's just so refreshing.
Right. Yep. 100%.
It's so so many emails are like, looking forward to your favorable response after they've written like a 10 paragraph.
Totally. That's so true.
Been there. I want, if I look up to you, I want to pour my guts out and have that moment of connection.
Of course.
But the question is, do you want to pour your guts out and write a journal entry to the person, or do you actually want to start building a relationship?
Yep. 100%.
If you want to build a relationship, you have to have massive empathy, and you have to understand that Mastin or Sheryl Sandberg or Malcolm Gladwell are incredibly busy, and they only have time for a quick email that they can glance at.
That's right. It's interesting you say that, because one of my mindsets has always been to always ask a question someone will say yes to.
Yeah.
So like, will you write the foreword for my book? Way too much of an ask,
Huge.
right? But something like, what do you think about this title, or something so like micro, right? I think is always really good. And the other thing is, it's funny you say this. I think I'm going to change my recommendation now based on this context, because I get people daily who send me emails that basically is just like, how can you give me everything I want, Mastin? And I'm not going to recognize that you have limited time and that you have all these obligations. And there's a sort of like my favorite is like, can we grab 15 minutes for coffee or some shit, which is never fucking true ever, or hop on a quick call. Like, these are keywords that I see.
Yeah.
And I always reply. I don't say anything. I just send a link to Amazon to Give and Take by Adam Grant. Which
funny.
is, that's all I do. And I think now I'll probably put just do the Amazon link to The Third Door and to Give and Take by Adam Grant, because like the message is like not the best way to ask, for something. And the thing is, it's not that I don't like to help people. It's just that when there's an expectation, especially of you owe me something, and or not a recognition of how busy I am or whatever it might be, there is a less of a desire to, because when people reach out with expectation, it's definitely a huge turnoff. I think that's a really big deal. So I know that we're sort of wrapping up, and I have two last questions I want to get to. Yeah. There's so much more we could talk about, but two last questions. What's the difference between how you got these interviews and stalking? Mm-hmm. Like, seriously, because like I'm thinking like, okay, like I'm gonna go like listen in on Alex in the bathroom, and I'm thinking like I'm gonna get a cease and desist order from a judge if I do that. So like, how do you do that? Because I can imagine people now trying to do that shit to you. So like, what's the line? Because I also think that there's a lot of people with especially with celebrities, the paparazzi and people like that kind of get bothered by it. So how did you navigate like persistence without annoyance? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, in the beginning I used to, when I would hear questions like that, I would laugh. But now that I don't have that much context, but even small stories of understanding how serious stalking actually is in some situations, like sort of terrifying. So I don't really joke about it anymore. But when I look at, my early days of, hiding in the bathroom with Tim Ferriss or, chasing Larry King through a grocery store, there's a couple things. First of all, is I was 18 years old and dumb and young, and I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. That's number one.
Number one. Yeah.
Number one. But also at the same time, that being the context, also in hindsight, yeah, the bathroom shit was weird, but it wasn't like Tim was in the other stall and I was just looking at him through the bathroom crack. No, he was outside of the bathroom. I was in the bathroom waiting for the perfect time to jump out when he was
totally.
And he was at a public appearance where he was doing a speaking, like a book signing or a speaking engagement.
Yep.
Like, dude, if you're doing a book signing and some young person is just sort of like waiting by the exit to come up to ask you a question,
you're going to talk to them.
You're like, good hustle. You're like, good hustle. Like,
totally.
If that person was waiting in front of your apartment building or in front of your hotel, you're like, yo, this is personal time now.
Yeah, totally. So what's your discernment? Because, like I can, I always, as I said, I'm infinitely impressed with the human being's nervous system to be very creative in ways I could never expect. So like if there was if someone wanted to be persistent and they're hearing like, oh yeah, I'm going to go do that now. What would you have like a persistence disclaimer and or guideline to say to someone?
Yes. So, and I'll share it with a story because I explained that 8-month quest to Buffett, that. And finally, after the 8-month experience, I got the interview with Bill Gates. And Gates' office loved the interview so much that they're like, we will help you however we can. I'm like, well, I know Bill and Warren are pretty good friends. I think you guys can, make an interview happen. And they're like, absolutely. So Bill Gates' office contacts Warren Buffett's office on my behalf. And I am freaking out of happiness.
Oh my God.
And I get a response back. And I'll never know exactly what happened, but I assume Buffett's office essentially was like, look, we know all about Alex. And this is not happening.
Oh my God.
And I got an email from Bill Gates' chief of staff saying, no more contact to Buffett's office. Thanks.
Whoa.
And what I learned from that is I had been so persistent that I had got myself blacklisted.
Yep.
And every business book talks about the key of persistence, but none talk about the dangers of over persistence.
Yep.
Where you can bang on a door so many times that instead of breaking it down, you get the police called on you.
Yep.
And, over persistence is, I think, one of the greatest threats to talk about, long-term relationships. Like me and Warren Buffett do not have a long-term relationship, right? Because of the dangers of over persistence. And I learned that over persistence can be so detrimental that I had dug myself into such a deep hole that even Bill Gates couldn't pull me out.
Right. That's huge, man. Whoa.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I had to learn by failure.
Yep.
I didn't want to learn, but because I learned it, I never made that mistake again.
So like if you were to go back and advise your younger self, right? What would you, if you had to coach yourself and you say, okay, you know what? You're going to get this, but do it this way, right? If you had a time machine, right? Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Oh, wow. Yeah. If I had a time machine, this book would have been easy as fuck.
Well, of course, but in that specific case, what would you say? What would you say to yourself?
And am I allowed to like give myself spoilers of how the future is going to play out?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I would tell myself, first of all, I would still maybe write the opening letter to Buffett's office. That's fine to sort of open the communication. But then I would sort of lay off after the first one. My problem was I didn't know I was going to get the Bill Gates interview. Right. I thought I needed Buffett, and then after Buffett, I would get Bill Gates. But if I could go myself and say, look, calm down. The Bill Gates interview will come to be, and they'll love it so much they'll make that introduction. If I had played it cool and just trusted that it would work out, I would have been – look, if I just sent Buffett's office one letter or two letters, when Gates' office went to them, I wouldn't have been fucking blacklisted.
Right, totally.
And I think my problem was I was so desperate that my desperation clogged my intuition.
Oh, dude, that is like a fucking that's not like quotable, tweetable. That's like a master lesson you just said right there.
I believe 100% desperation clogs intuition.
That is so huge, dude. That is talk about like the bouncer at the third door. Desperation.
Right. Desperation clogs intuition 100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, cool. So this ties into our last question because that is fantastic. So when we were talking before this we started hitting record, you talked about how everyone talked. You thought everyone wanted to know about the tools and the this and the that you learned, but you said that everyone wanted to understand about fear. And I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about the common question around fear of stepping into the third door, and maybe what you've learned about the fear idea stopping people from moving forward.
One of the most surprising things that I learned on this 7-year journey was that I had this assumption that all the people who I wanted to interview must have been fearless. I assume Bill Gates had to be fearless to start Microsoft, or Mark Zuckerberg had to be fearless to start Facebook. Or else, how else could they have achieved these things? And I was facing a ton of problems because I was terrified in the beginning. Forget about the beginning. The whole way through, I was terrified. And I thought there was something wrong with me. Like, why couldn't I achieve this state of fearlessness? And it wasn't like I didn't try. I read the books. I did the journaling. Like, I just couldn't rid myself of this fear. Every step had its new kind of fear.
Yep.
And one of the most surprising things from all these interviews and research was learning that every single person was actually terrified when they were starting. There's not an exception. They were all terrified when they were starting. And what I learned is that it wasn't fearlessness that they achieved. It was courage.
Love that.
And the difference between fearlessness and courage is critically important, but easy to miss.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
So fearlessness is jumping off of the cliff and not thinking about it.
Yep.
That's idiotic.
Yep.
Courage, on the other hand, is acknowledging how terrified you are. Analyzing the consequences of what might happen. And then deciding that you still care so much about this that you're going to just take one thoughtful step forward anyway.
I love that. It's funny, in some of our trainings, I talk about how, like, there's all these virtues that we've been identified back in the day. And I think the most important one is courage, because without courage, the rest aren't possible, and I think that is so well said. And the idea that it's universal is, I think, a really important thing, a huge takeaway for everyone here, because I think especially people who are just getting started, and also even if you're not getting started, next level, like you said, new level, new devil, right? Like there's always a fear at whatever that next level is. It always feels terrifying. Is such a huge thing, and to know that Maya Angelou, Lady Gaga, it sounds like Buffett's still scared of you. But Gates, like all that stuff. I think that's such a huge takeaway for people. And I also, by the way, love how candid you are about your experience, because most people want to kind of like skirt that one under the rug. And I think my feelings, my sense is there's going to be a kind of restructuring of that dynamic at some point. I think you're not as threatened. You're not threatening. If Warren Buffett is listening right now, Alex is not a threat. So final question for you is, what is your next third door? Like, what's next for you? Have you had time to think about that? Or I know that, obviously launching a book is all consuming, but is there something emerging for you that's next?
This is what I know. I know that, I spent 7 years on this, and it's only been out for about a month or two. So it's still very new.
Well, I think today, or as we're recording today, or yesterday, was the 2-month anniversary.
2-month anniversary.
If I followed correctly, yes.
Yeah. So it's all very new, and there's this story that I read. The weird part is I can't even remember where I read it, but I do know that I'll never forget this story because it had such a big impact on me. And during my research, I came across this anecdote of a teacher that worked for Teach for America. And she was teaching in Baltimore, this really tough part of town and this really rough school. She's teaching 3rd grade. And she was like, these kids just need some inspiration today. So instead of the math lesson, she's like, all right, today we're going to all draw pictures of our biggest dream of what we want to be when we grow up. So she passes out paper and crayons, and all the kids start coloring, except for this one little boy in the back of the room. And his face is pretty sad and blank, and he's not coloring. And halfway through, though, his eyes light up and he starts drawing. So the kids, pass in their papers and they leave, and the teacher's going through them, and she sees that the little boy drew a picture of a pizza delivery man. And the mother wasn't surprised. The mother said that the only male figure in his life who's not in jail or on drugs is his uncle who delivers pizza.
Wow.
And what that story taught me is that young people will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. Yes. They will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. And it's not their fault. It's our responsibility, whether it's schools or families or media at large, to illuminate more branches.
I love that.
And that's the mission of this book moving forward.
I love that. That's
finding
awesome.
ways to just keep illuminating more branches.
That's awesome. Possibility, is that I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but if someone can literally believe something is possible, like it's not like, oh, it's a vision board and it says possibility on it and yada yada, right, with some yoga retreat somewhere. But like, if you literally have the nervous system response of that is possible, that's all you need, really, at the end of the day, because that's the shift that's going to really make all the rest happen. So I think that's awesome. Your work, this book is awesome. Obviously, there'll be links in show notes, but it's thirddoorbook.com. Get there, get a copy for your friends, family. This book is awesome, you guys. And, when I make a book recommendation, I don't always do that on these podcasts, but what I do, get that goddamn book. Buy it, buy the book. And unlike Gary Vaynerchuk, not only have I read, I will read this book again So I want to also just give a little right jab to Gary on that because I saw the clip he gave and I thought that was pretty funny. But God damn it, Gary, I thought that was pretty funny. So, dude, thank you so much, and very grateful for your time, and excited to see because this book I will have a life. I will tell you that. A year later after Claim Your Power has come out, the sales are going up. Because word of mouth and people are talking about it and stuff like that. So I think. I don't think that the story of this book has even really begun yet. So very, very excited to see where it goes, dude. And thank you for all your hard work and dedication and passion and honesty and vulnerability and truthfulness and just all the awesomeness you brought to this interview. I can't wait to see people's takeaways. It's going to be really, really cool, dude. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, man.